Hello, everybody. Jeff back with another episode of How to Play the Game. Last time we talked about isolating your games. This time we're going to talk about how to play a series. So, a series is any sequence of very similar but independent matchups. So, if you're playing StarCraft, for example, your series is a best of 7 game to game to game to game to game. But if you're playing CSGO or Valorant, then your series is the attack half and the defense half. It's a series of rounds that are very similar and are connected to each other, but are played out independently. So, we're going to use StarCraft as our example for today because Maru very masterfully plays this series versus Dark, displaying some really excellent understanding of what it takes to win a full championship type series. It's really great. It's a long series. There's a lot to dig into. So rather than just talking about it, let's get right into it. So we're going to start here exactly where it's paused. Maru, at the very beginning, does a very safe and stable start to the series. This is a really good way to start any series. Do something that's very well rounded, do something that's robust and covers most of your bases. Not all of them, nothing covers every base, but does the majority of things well. The other aspect of this is that this is the start of your conditioning. Whenever you begin a series of things, the opponent is going to be able to look to past rounds, games, what have you, as an example of what you're going to do in the present and future rounds and games. So, how you begin that conditioning is really important. That's why a well-rounded, robust build, strategy, default, what have you, is really valuable. But flexibility within that is very important because if it doesn't branch out in any way, then the conditions that you're establishing at the very beginning of the game or the series don't amount to anything over the course of the series. And it's important to build those conditions into something that's really going to help you win. It's another layer of achieving victory here. So, here early on, Maru establishes the conditions of doing this. Double racks expand on the low ground. It's a build that has recently come into fashion. It's relatively new. It's very robust. It's got a lot of options as far as what you can do off of it. And it's fairly safe. But the most valuable thing about this build in the series is that it denies information. So it's really hard to see what exactly is going on behind this because it takes some map space early on and prevents scouting information from the opponent. This applies to Valorant in the sense that your first default has presence on the map, doesn't allow the enemy to know which direction you're leaning necessarily because you've got util and spaces that deny them from getting free information. That's really what it's all about, is denial of information here. And it's got an aggressive component too. It gets to probe and it gets to test the enemy's defenses if they're cutting too many corners, if they're exposing themselves. You'll find that out early on to be able to take advantage of it. Now, here he goes for a 3cc variant. It's a pretty economic focused version of the build. We're not going to get into that. We're going to go ahead and skip ahead to my next marker here at... game one is kind of long. 3150-ish. So, Maru goes back. Game 2, Maru builds on the conditions that he established in game 1. This is really important because it allows you to establish, hey, this is something that I like to do. You're going to have to figure this out, right? And he gained the advantage of getting map 1. He is up in the series, which means that the pressure is on the opponent to do something to change the texture of the game, right? Maru has established advantage. And by doing the same thing, he not only reinforces the conditioning, but he avoids overplaying his hand and exposing new ideas or taking big risks. And that's incredibly valuable. Now, if you don't win the first round game in your series, doesn't mean that you should immediately stray away from your conditioning, but it does mean that you have this opportunity to really make something a little bit more unusual, a little bit more wild. And we will see here at 3240 that Maru does the exact same version as game one. So it's not only that he establishes the same conditions, but he follows it up in the same way, furthering that pressure of, hey, you need to figure out how to deal with this because this is something that's strong. Now, it also asks the question again of his component, do you know how to deal with this? Have you figured it out yet? The answer turns out to be a resounding no. This game is very short. And in game 2 here, or 3, Maru is up 2-0. He's done the same build twice in a row. He's established a condition. And what happens now is that he does the same thing again at the surface level. Now, this is really important because so far as Dark understands, it's the same thing that he's just lost to twice in a row. So he's going to start taking steps to prepare against that exact same thing. What that means is that Maru is now able to change the script and find greater success with that. The larger lead opens up greater options, and the opponent either needs to do something very drastic to try and get back into the series, or do something very stable, something that's going to be very well rounded. It's going to be able to handle this, try and figure it out, and get as clean of a game or round off as possible to get back into the series. At this point for Maru, it's almost necessary to show the flexibility of the established conditions, however, because if you play the same thing, having the first step be the same is very valuable, but having the step 2 be the exact same off of this initial conditioning every time, it's going to become stale. And at that point, you start to look at the player and ask, are they one-dimensional? Is this all they know how to do? And it gives greater opportunity for the opponent to figure out the game early on in the series, to figure out exactly what's being done and how to stop it earlier in the series, which lessens the value of the conditions later in the series. You want those conditions to remain strong throughout the duration of the series so that you can utilize them and their flexibility more and more over the course of it. So what we'll see here is that Maru actually goes for a different execution than he does in the previous games, where behind his hidden information wall that he's established at the front, he takes a much more aggressive approach to show that there are branches to this build, that there are other ideas at play behind the scenes, and that it can change pace and tempo and hit a lot harder unexpectedly than it has in the past. He ends up losing this game, not necessarily because the build is bad or his decision making in the build was bad, but that he makes another decision that kind of just throws the game. But he still managed to build on the conditions, and that's something that's incredibly valuable for the series. Now here, a little bit sooner than this. What happens, we're in game 4. We've established certain conditions. We've established that those conditions can branch off in 2 very different directions. And Maru goes back to those conditions one more time. Again, this denies information. It applies pressure. It asks questions. And now Dark, he's not able to just prepare for the thing that he saw in the first game. He also has to be ready for the thing that he saw in the second game, which, while didn't work, was still dangerous. So it prevents him from over-investing into one solution. Maru actually goes back to the original build, by the way, this time, the one that won him games 1 and 2. And as we'll discover here in the near future, let's check my timestamps. It wins him this game. This game is a little longer than the others. There's a lot more to it. There's more back and forth. Dark is starting to figure out what's going on, but Maru still plays an excellent game behind it, and the build is robust, as we mentioned before, so it works out. As we enter into game 5, there's an important aspect of the series that we need to take into account. Maru is up 3-1 in a best of 7. Now, at this point, Dark needs to do either something very stable or very drastic. Now, you'll find that championship level players will often take the gamble because you can't prepare against everything. At this point, Maru could just do an all-in, take a huge gamble, try and snatch victory away right away. Dark is hanging on by a thread. Championship players will go for a gamble of their own. Oftentimes, they'll try and just break it open. But the other option is to just play something very safe, very careful, very robust, get into a longer game. Maru's choice, to make sure he didn't throw away his huge lead to anything ridiculously aggressive or very risky, is to play a very safe version of his build. And what that kind of results in is a game that plays out much more methodically. Now, Maru takes a very, very safe stance, but he's still got some pressure on the map. A similar example is a Knight's Default in Valorant, where you play very passively in spawn with a heavy stack to one side on the attacker side, waiting for the defense to make an aggressive push, but you have some space elsewhere on the map so that you're not just locked into a tiny little corner, giving up all the map space and presence, right? You don't want to just be hiding in your base. You don't want to just be hiding in your corner, because then your opponent's not under pressure and they'll figure that out relatively quickly. However, you're still trying to play safe, so you don't want to overstep, take any unnecessary risks, or really expose yourself. What happens to Maru in this game is that he loses that pressure here. The Banshee goes down, which is a phrase that will mean literally nothing to anybody who doesn't watch StarCraft. But he finds himself, for all intents and purposes, trapped in that corner. Now, he does exactly what he wanted to do, which is fend off this early pressure. This attack by Dark here has been known to outright kill people in the early game who weren't ready for it. Maru knows Dark very well. He knows that he's like that. He's ready for that pressure and play. And he plays a game that would get him back into this game very well if he hadn't lost all of his additional pressure on the map. The game doesn't go for very long. Maru knows that he's behind. As soon as he loses that additional pressure, Dark really ramps up. Maru's not able to bring it back, and ultimately Dark ends up just squeezing Maru out of the game. It's similar to if you're playing Valorant and you're 4-1 split across the attack side of the map, and then you lose your weak side player, and now you're just 4 players standing holding hands in one corner of the map. You have no information, you have no pressure, and you're just waiting to get hunted down. So you take the fights that you're given and hope that you win them. The difference is that in StarCraft, it's a little bit more mathematical. There's not as much clutch aim involved. Now the texture of the series has really changed. We're moving into game 6 of a best of 7. It's within 1 point. Maru could close it out right here. If he drops this, then it's all tied up. We're in risky territory here. Maru elects to go back to the established conditions. He's survived kind of that weird desperation. It's not that Dark couldn't do that, but they're both looking at this now as a series that they can just win. And so Maru goes back to the established conditions, and he's going to play to win. He's not going to all in. He's not going to try and close it out early. He's not scared of his opponent, but he is going to try and take advantage of the conditions that he's established in this game to set himself up for success. And he chooses the most successful variant, the one that's gotten him all three of his wins here so far in the series, just because it's worked out very well. Maybe there are other factors like it being a particularly good map for it or whatnot. You'll never really be able to tell unless you're able to be that player in that situation. But what ends up happening in this series is that it becomes very, very close. As we mentioned earlier, Dark was starting to figure out what was going on, and we end up in this super late macro game slugfest because the established conditions were made, but Dark got the critical information early on. It wasn't guarded well enough, and he was able to prepare really well for what this was. So fortunately, because the conditions that were established were very well rounded and robust, they got Maru into a very even game, but he still had to get the win the old-fashioned way. There was no advantage from the build other than the fact that it was incredibly well rounded and able to get him into this position in the first place. If it had been a little bit more fragile, he likely would have just lost. And that's really one of the main benefits to establishing the condition that he did, is that the worst case scenario here is that it can't be taken advantage of. It just gives you a very even game. And if you believe you're as good as your opponents, an even game is okay. It's never what you want, because then it becomes more of a coin flip, right? You're looking at 50-50 odds of winning if it's an even game. But it is acceptable. It's more acceptable than getting taken advantage of, hard countered, shut down, stuffed in your attack, whatever. So that is what ultimately ends up happening. Maru ends up in an even game. He's able to play it out. It takes forever. It's very intense. It's a excellent display of skill, but at the end of the day, Maru does take him down, not because of the build, but because of how well he played out the rest of the game. The win wasn't decided early on by any stretch of the imagination. It was decided in numerous other decisions and moments that were made over the course of the game. So, hopefully, this was informative enough for you to understand how to better play a series, how to prepare and take advantage of conditions, how to set up flexibility within those conditions, and when and where you need to vary those conditions so that you're not looking one or two dimensional, that you're not looking like a stale team or player within the course of a series, so that you show you have a broader spectrum of looks. We will probably revisit this with the international finals that Team Spirit ended up winning, because they played a masterful series versus PSG LGD in that finals. And the way that they were able to do it was very similar to this, but it was a different game and it was a different set of conditions that they established, and they had a different X factor at play. For Maru, it was the flexibility in his build and the robustness of his play. The robustness of your play is always going to have to be a factor in a long series. It always comes back to those fundamentals that you establish. But at the end of the day, if you want to secure a major win over a great opponent, you need some kind of unlock potential, some X factor, some variation in your build, some additional flexibility, some hidden gem locked away within those initial conditions. So hopefully that'll help you guys in your series when you're playing in your games. This is really meant for more of an established team, because it's hard to set these up in your ranked games. But if you're a good IGL, perhaps you can do that. If you find yourself queuing into the same player over and over again in a 1v1 game like StarCraft or Mortal Kombat, or what have you. You can do that as well. You can start to really crawl inside that player's head by establishing conditions over the course of those games. And if you've got somebody you match up with a lot, day to day to day, then you can really build this long history of established conditions. Just remember, the more you do something and the better it works, the closer they'll get to figuring it out. All right, guys. Thank you for sticking with me through this longer episode. Look forward to seeing you next time. As always, leave comments, questions, and concerns down below. Be sure to like and subscribe to support everything we're doing here. And yeah, good luck in your games. Peace.